Hello friends, and welcome to another video by me, Sarah Gardner, for this StencilGirl Products creative team. Today I'm making a zine. I'm starting out with some of this basic ephemera. I'm just using one of these pages as my substrate. Basically, that's the piece of paper that I'm using to create the zine. Usually it's an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and this is about the same dimensions. I'm starting off by covering parts of it with a coat of gesso, just to kind of muddle what's going on the paper and also reinforce it because I want to be adding a lot of different layers to this. And speaking of layers, next up is a layer of collage. I'm using collage papers that I've created using different media and a bunch of different StencilGirl Products stencils. I will list all of these in the description box below. I really love all the colors in these papers, so it's a great way to add color to the first layer of my zine, but it's also giving me ideas for colors that I can choose as I go on making it and adding other layers. Continuing with my layering process, I'm adding some Stabilo Woody in turquoise, and then I'm going to use a palette knife to just scrape on some of this golden So Flat white, titanium white paint. It's super flat, and I know that it will take other media really well later on. With my base layer of flat white paint, I am ready to add some watercolor. I'm adding Dr. P.H. Martin's concentrated watercolor in tobacco brown, and you can see in my little plate there that I already have some colors that dried from an earlier project. There's a little shimmer from the Daniel Smith Duochrome Arctic Fire that was in the plate. And then that green that I'm working some water into right now is Daniel Smith Amazonite Genuine. I'm just going to brush some of this on in a kind of a wash, mixing the colors together and then blotting them with a rag. As I'm working this master that is going to turn into a zine, I'm using a template so that I can make sure that my pages in the zine are right side up and that they fold in the right way. So you can see where I have front cover, back cover, page 6, page 5, and then I'm showing you the arrows that indicate where it will be a 2-page spread that opens up when you're paging through the zine. I'm using this to place the different elements that I'm adding now to the zine. First off, I'm going to use the stencil as kind of a stamp. I want these little leafy bud type botanicals to show up the way they look in the stencil. This was a little difficult because I had to kind of work with a mirror image and I'd never done this before, but it all worked out. I ended up kind of cleaning up some of the messy parts and then using a paintbrush to go in and fill in some little gaps in the shapes of the little fronds and leaves. With that spread done, actually that's not a spread, that's the front and back cover of the zine. I'm going to now work on page 1 and 2, and I'm using another stencil, but this time just in the standard way a stencil is used, sponging through some paint, and I'm kind of thinking about it being an open spread, so with some space for me to put text because I'm going to have some writing in there. It's going to tell a little story. On the next spread, I'm continuing to use this Lucas Viridian paint, this green that looks really good with the pinks and the kind of lime colors that are working in the zine so far. And finally, I'm using some magenta and some fluorescent pink by Lucas to sponge that through this layered scallops stencil. You can see that I'm not being too precious about this. It's a little messy, but that's fine with me. There's still more layers to come, folks. And apparently I didn't get something on film. I used some Neocolor 2s to color in those fronds up above, the green fronds, and inside the circles on the other side. Now it's time to add some details. I'm going in with some paint pens and outlining some of my stencil shapes, adding some dots, adding some lines, just adding interest, and this is the fun part for me. I love adding these little doodly details. Since I'm working with this zine as a master, it's kind of all upside down and backwards, so I keep having to use my template and refer to it to make sure that I'm framing the pages correctly with everything that I'm doing and getting things the right way up. I feel like it needs a little contrast, so I'm going to pick up that kind of rusty brown that's kind of showing up in the background, and I'm using this acrylic ink by Sennelier in Chinese Orange to just add these little brush marks. just when you thought there couldn't be any more detail to add, here come the gel pens. But now it's time to get serious. I have to add my text. I have to make this into a zine. It has to tell a story. So that's where Raymond Sigmund's ATC stencils come in really handy. I'm going to use them to create spaces for my text. You may be asking yourself why I didn't just stencil the paint through the stencil instead of tracing with a pencil and then painting it. And the reason is that I wanted to have some good clean lines, and I know that stenciling through the stencil doesn't always produce that for me. So this is a great workaround for that. And I'm going to have to add a couple layers of this white paint. It's the So Flat paint by Golden, because it's picking up some of the more water soluble media that are underneath. And that's fine. I don't mind. It'll all work out in the end. Another way that I'm using Ray's ATC stencils is to cut out shapes, basically. I'm tracing the shapes onto this paper. It's some lined vintage paper that's kind of yellowed. And then I'll write whatever I want to inside these little bubbles and cut them out and glue them into the zine. This is actually going to be the title page text for my zine. Here's another one of Ray's stencils from the same set, and I'm kind of doing the same thing that I did before with the other lined stencil. This one has a little shape to it, and these lines aren't going to be wide enough for me to write in. So I'm just tracing a couple of them, and then I'm going to join them together to create some lines for me to write in. Here's another bit of text, and I've just written it out onto some vintage lined paper. It's probably the same paper that I used before. And I'm just gluing it into this page of the zine. Now, what you need to know is I did plan this out. I wrote it out. Like I wrote all of my phrases and words like I'm writing a little book or writing a little poem. And so it's all planned out in advance of what's going on each page. And that's how I'm putting the text on in these different spots where I've created space for my text. And here you see me putting down some masking tape, and it's kind of the same thing as my painted lines that I used Ray's stencil for, but it's a little bit different. It kind of mixes it up. So it's another opportunity, another space for me to write in what I have planned for this page in my zine. And you can see here that I have added all of the text that I have planned for each of these places and pages. And now I'm just adding finishing touches. I really wanted to integrate some of the papers and painted areas that I put in here with text. So I added some more of those circles with the black Posca pen, and I'm filling those in with the same gel pens that I used before. Now I have a bunch of vintage paper and some very white lines where my text is, and I want to meld and integrate the white painted lines into my pages as well. So I'm using Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2s, watercolor crayons, and some water on a brush to just add some color to these white lines. So my master is finished. And what does it mean? It's an original artwork, And what you do with a zine like this is you go and have high quality color copies made. And usually what happens is the dimensions or the proportions aren't exactly right, so you're going to have some edges that you need to trim off. And I like to do this very carefully so that when I fold my zine, I'm not getting a lot of overlapping edges that I need to deal with in the folded zine. So here I'm cutting the edges and now I'm folding it up. And I fold it in half first, this way, and crease that line pretty good, and then fold it in half the other way. And I'm trying to match up the fold as well as the edges, because I know when I want to fold the zine together, it will help me if the folds match as well as the edges. And the last two folds are just these quarters, basically. And the last step before you can assemble it is to cut this line in the center that's right in the middle. It's the center 2 pages. It folds up and it's ready to go. And what I like to do is glue the whole thing together so that it's really like a little book and it doesn't seem like a piece of folded paper. So here I have my zine all assembled and glued. I actually trimmed some of the edges if there was any white kind of showing because the folds were imperfect. And part of my recovery as a recovering perfectionist is to be forgiving of myself for needing those edges to be perfect. Now I'm going to do a giveaway because I've got lots of copies. I'll assemble a few of these zines and do a post on Instagram about the giveaway. So make sure you're following at juicy.s.art. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this gives you some helpful ideas and tips to make your own zine.